as far as I'm concerned, pretty much saved my life because I had no idea, where or what I was going to go.
Sure.
Yeah.
Wow, that's great to hear. Um, it said on Wikipedia that you stated that you're not interested and will never talk to Phil Anselmo again.
I'm not, and that's all we need to say about that.
All we need to say.
Vinnie Paul, a name forever tied to the thunderous drums and the very soul of a wild, unrelenting era of metal. More than just the drummer of Pantera, he was a symbol of resilience, rebellion, and unwavering loyalty to music, even as the world crumbled around him. With his powerful drumming style, iconic double bass technique, and the spirit of live loud, die proud, Vinnie didn't just keep time for the band. He kept the heartbeat of millions of fans around the globe. He earned his place among the greatest drummers in heavy metal history, standing shoulder to shoulder with legends like Lars Ulrich and Dave Lombardo. Albums like Cowboys from Hell, Vulgar Display of Power, and Far Beyond Driven weren't just milestones in Pantera's career. They were proof of Vinnie's raw talent and his live, real, play hard philosophy. But could the fame, the booze, and the roar of the stage drown out the emptiness he carried after the brutal death of his brother, Dimebag Darrell? A man who was always the life of the party, yet died quietly and alone from heart disease at the age of 54. What made a man like that? And what was truly lost after that final drum beat faded away? Let's dive into the story of Vinnie Paul, the man who kept the rhythm for an entire generation. Early life. Despite towering on stage like a metal giant fueled by pure rage, Vinnie Paul was, at his core, a Texas kid raised on music and discipline, an unlikely fusion of Southern tradition and rebellious instinct. He was born on March 11, 1964, in Abilene, Texas, into a family deeply rooted in music. His father, Jerry Abbott, was a country musician, sound engineer, and later a producer, the very man who built the first home studio for his sons, where Vinnie and his younger brother, Darrell Lance Abbott, later known as Dimebag Darrell, began their earliest jam sessions. In that modest house filled with the sound of strings and rhythms, Vinnie was initially encouraged to play brass instruments, but he was quickly drawn to the drums and the primal rhythm they unleashed. From a young age, Vinnie was a hyperactive kid who craved loud sounds, fast tempos, and hated following the rules. Unlike Darrell, who was obsessed with guitar technique, Vinnie gravitated toward legendary rock drummers like Peter Criss, Kiss, Alex Van Halen, and Tommy Aldridge, who inspired him to develop a hard-hitting, high-energy playing style. Remarkably, Vinnie was entirely self-taught, relying solely on instinct and feel, yet he possessed a rare natural sense of timing and rhythm. From early on, Vinnie and Darrell formed an unbreakable bond. More than just brothers, they were musical soulmates who instinctively understood each other with every beat and riff. As teenagers, they began performing in local bars, under dim lights, through long nights of music, and amidst the roars of intoxicated metal fans. In 1981, at just 17 years old, Vinnie and Darrell officially formed Pantera, initially embracing the glam metal style that was popular at the time. But beneath the makeup and glittery outfits, Vinnie felt something was off. He yearned for a heavier, rawer, and more aggressive sound. Alongside his brother, he quietly prepared for a transformation, a true rebellion that would go on to reshape the history of heavy metal. Vinnie Paul's early life wasn't marked by trauma or family hardship, but it was through a professional musical environment, an unshakable blood bond with his gifted younger brother, and an intense passion for drumming that he was forged into a warrior, ready to enter the battlefield of the chaotic and immortal years that lay ahead. The journey with Pantera. Pantera wasn't born in the spotlight. It was forged in sweat, blood, and countless unseen nights of perseverance. When Vinnie Paul and his younger brother Dimebag Darrell formed the band in 1981, they were just two wild-dreaming Texas teens playing Van Halen covers in local bars, rocking big hair, shiny leather pants, and chasing the glam metal dream. In those early years, Pantera followed the glam metal trend like hundreds of other bands, releasing 4 independent albums, but their reach never extended far beyond the American South. At the time, Vinnie was already an incredibly disciplined drummer, responsible not just for the rhythm, but for the internal organization of the band. While Dimebag was the artistic soul, Vinnie was the operational brain, serious, cool-headed, and unwavering. They were like opposite poles of the same current, completely different, yet unable to exist without one another. And even if the music they played hadn't yet exploded, one thing that never wavered was their brotherly bond. In 1987, everything began to change when Pantera replaced lead singer Terrence Lee with a new frontman, Philip Anselmo. Phil brought in a new energy, raw, wild, and intense. Vinnie immediately knew glam metal was no longer an option. From that moment on, Pantera completely shed their glittery 80s skin and transformed into something heavier, grittier, angrier, a sound that would come to be known as groove metal, pioneered by Pantera themselves. Cowboys from Hell, 1990, was the first shot fired. Vinnie played drums like every fill was a punch to the face, locking in with Dimebag's razor-sharp riffs to create a sound no one could mistake. But that was just the beginning. With Vulgar Display of Power, 1992, Pantera evolved into a beast. Vinnie wasn't just playing drums anymore, he was commanding with them. Walk, This Love, Mouth for War, all built on foundations that Vinnie laid like unbreakable concrete. He didn't need speed to impress. He crushed listeners with weight, space, and almost military-tight precision. At a time when thrash metal was declining and grunge was rising, Pantera became metal's fiercest response, and Vinnie kept its heart beating. By Far Beyond Driven, 1994, Pantera weren't just rebelling, they were conquering. The album debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200, an almost unthinkable feat for a pure metal band with no radio hits and zero compromise. Behind the scenes, Vinnie continued steering the ship, from production and sound control to tour schedules, and even, at times, managing Phil, who was spiraling deeper into addiction and self-destruction. But the higher Pantera rose, the more they fractured. Phil Anselmo became increasingly distant and unstable, often absent from recording sessions. Vinnie, ever the strict perfectionist, couldn't tolerate the lack of discipline. To him, it wasn't just a bandmate slipping away, it was his family being betrayed. Vinnie tried to hold it together, but Phil didn't. The joy of performing gave way to heavy atmospheres, grueling months-long tours, and growing hostility among members. Dimebag was caught in the crossfire between his brother and the vocalist he once stood shoulder to shoulder with. The Great Southern Trendkill, 1996, and Reinventing the Steel, 2000, would be Pantera's final albums. Though the music remained ferocious, the band was no longer a united force. Phil drifted off to pursue other projects. In 2003, Pantera broke up, without a handshake, without apologies, just anger and bitter silence. For Vinnie Paul, it wasn't just the end of a band, it was the collapse of his entire world. Pantera wasn't just a job, it was the bond between him and his brother, the embodiment of everything they had built together since they were kids, jamming in their father's garage. The breakup didn't just take away part of his career, it took away part of himself. But what Vinnie didn't know was that the deepest pain still lay ahead, a fateful night that would carve a scar into his heart that would never heal. And from that moment on, Vinnie would never be the same man again. Tragedy and rebirth. After Pantera disbanded in silence and bitterness, Vinnie Paul all but disappeared from the stage. He refused to speak about the band, avoided the press, and withdrew into his own world, where memories of a once blazing metal empire had now turned to ashes. But his love for music still lingered. In 2003, Vinnie and his brother Dimebag Darrell decided to start over, not as Pantera, but with a new chapter called Damage Plan. They recorded the album Newfound Power, hoping to create something new, not Pantera 2.0, but something they could fully control. With Damage Plan, the brothers had the freedom to express themselves without the long-standing internal conflicts that had haunted them. They went on tour, returned to the stage with their old energy, but this time there was caution, fatigue, and a subtle emptiness. No matter how hard they tried to smile, Vinnie knew Damage Plan could never replace Pantera, nor could it heal the cracks left in their hearts. Then came one night in December 2004, when Vinnie Paul's world was torn apart forever. On the night of December 8th, while Damage Plan was performing at the Alrosa Villa nightclub in Columbus, Ohio, an armed man stormed the stage and shot Dimebag Darrell dead right before Vinnie's eyes. The shooter, Nathan Gale, a former Marine suffering from delusional paranoia, believed Dimebag had stolen his music, and he came that night with a clear purpose: to kill a man who was idolized by millions. He fired a total of 15 shots, killing 4 people, and was only stopped when a police officer rushed the stage and shot him dead. Vinnie stood just a few feet away. He watched his brother, his musical soulmate, his partner of more than 20 years, collapse on the very stage they had called home. There are no words to describe that kind of pain. No brother is ever prepared to witness his sibling murdered on stage. No musician can continue standing after such a horror. That night, a part of Vinnie's soul died alongside Dimebag. And from that moment on, he was no longer Vinnie Paul of Pantera. After Dime's death, Vinnie disappeared again. He declined all offers to collaborate, even cut off contact with once close friends. He lived a quiet, reclusive life, surrounded only by loved ones, his girlfriend Chelsea, and alcohol, a lot of it. Not to get drunk, but to forget. It took nearly 3 years before Vinnie touched a drum kit again, and this time, not with his brother, but with complete strangers. In 2006, Vinnie was invited to join Hell Yeah, a metal supergroup formed by members of Mudvayne and Nothing Face. At first, he flat out refused. "I have nothing left to play," he once said. But after much persuasion, he agreed to try it, just once. That first jam session made him cry, not because it sounded good, but because, for the first time since that horrific night, Vinnie felt like he could breathe again. No one could replace Dimebag. But with Hell Yeah, he was back behind the drums, sweating, feeling the screams and bass reverberate through his chest, the kind of feeling only a stage artist can truly understand. Hell Yeah wasn't Pantera. It didn't need to be. For Vinnie, it was a place of rebirth. They released their debut album in 2007, and Vinnie officially returned to the metal world, not as an icon, but as a survivor. In the years that followed, he toured with Hell Yeah, released more albums, and tried to live a normal life. But those who knew him could tell. Vinnie never truly got over Dimebag's death. He always carried his brother's ashes in a pendant. There was always an empty chair next to his drum kit where Dime once stood. And there was always a silence inside him that no one could fill. He once said, "Music is the only thing that's kept me here. Without it, I wouldn't be alive." And so he stayed. Playing, screaming, laughing, drinking, and living, battered, but unbreakable. It was the only way Vinnie Paul knew how to survive hell. Personal life. On stage, Vinnie Paul was the embodiment of raw energy, long hair draped over a beaming face, a smile that never faded, and drum hits that felt like punches thrown into the air. Off stage, he was known as the soul of every party, a man with seemingly endless energy. Vinnie loved the noise, loved the booze, loved the laughter, and loved making sure everyone around him had a good time. In the metal world, he wasn't just Pantera's drummer. He was the ultimate host, the man behind the legendary all-night parties where beer, rock and roll, and brotherhood blended into something sacred. The symbol of that lifestyle was the cocktail he and Dimebag loved most, the Blacktooth Grin, a mix of Crown Royal and Coke, strong, dark, and sweet, just like the music they played. From backstage tour hangouts to living rooms in Texas, the Blacktooth Grin served as a toast to unbreakable brotherhood and a way for Vinnie to keep his brother's memory alive in every raised glass. But after Dimebag's death, the drink became a double-edged sword, fueling his laughter while concealing the silence no one was allowed to see. Despite being present at nearly every major party, Vinnie was intensely private about his personal life. He never married and had no children, not because he didn't want to, but because for him, music and Dimebag were relationships deep enough to leave no room for anything else. For many years, he was in a long-term relationship with Chelsea Yeager, a model nearly 2 decades his junior. She was more than just a girlfriend. She was a quiet companion who stood by him through countless shows, sharing both the spotlight and the silent moments backstage. Vinnie once said he didn't like being alone, but he didn't need a crowd either. What he truly needed was music, whiskey, and memory. 3 things that could either destroy you or save you. Those close to him recalled that even though he was the life of every party, when he returned to his room, he would often sit alone, quietly playing old Pantera tapes or setting out an empty chair next to his drum kit for Dimebag. For Vinnie, there was no such thing as getting over the pain. There was only learning to live with it. He once dreamed of writing a cookbook titled Drumming Up an Appetite with Vinnie Paul, where he would share his favorite recipes, mixed with backstage stories full of laughter and liquor. But that book was never completed. Like so many things in Vinnie's life, it remained an unfinished plan. A man who spent his life playing drums, but carried within him a void no one could ever fill. A man who could shake thousands of fans to their core, yet sat silently through long, lonely nights. That was Vinnie Paul. A man who lived for music as if there were no tomorrow, and loved his late brother as if he were still right there beside him, guitar in hand, ready to tear the world apart one more time. Final years. Though he had entered his 50s and carried a scar that would never heal from Dimebag's death, Vinnie Paul never once stepped away from the stage. For him, music wasn't just a career, it was an escape, the only way he could survive everything he had lost. With Hell Yeah, he continued releasing albums, touring, and living out the same play-hard spirit he had in the Pantera days, as if the years of tragedy had never happened. And yet, even as the lights still blazed and the drums still thundered, people began to notice something. Vinnie had changed. He still smiled, still partied, still roared every time he took the stage, but his eyes, once lit with boundless life, now held a quiet melancholy. Behind the familiar swagger was a man who had grown increasingly withdrawn, a survivor more than a warrior. Even in the middle of the crowd, Vinnie kept a subtle distance, a hollow space that only Dimebag had ever been able to fill. He rarely spoke of the past. Whenever asked about Pantera or Dimebag, Vinnie would deflect, offering short replies or a faint, strained smile. But no one blamed him. Everyone understood. Some pains can only be endured in silence because to speak of them would be to shatter. At an age when many musicians chose to rest, Vinnie kept living as if racing against time. One concert after another, endless studio sessions, parties without pause. It was as if his life beat to a drum rhythm that wouldn't allow him to stop. But his body could no longer keep pace with the heart of an immortal rocker. Age, an unbalanced lifestyle, and years of emotional and physical wear finally began to take their toll. On June 22, 2018, Vinnie Paul was found dead in his sleep at his Las Vegas home. The cause was determined to be dilated cardiomyopathy, a heart condition that weakens the heart's ability to pump blood, combined with severe coronary artery disease. He passed away at the age of 54, without any final words, no stage lights, no drum solo, just a quiet night. It was a departure that contrasted starkly with the way he lived, but perhaps it was the only way he could finally rest after decades of living each day like it might be his last. Vinnie was laid to rest beside Dimebag Darrell at Moore Memorial Gardens Cemetery in Arlington, Texas. 2 caskets, side by side, etched with the names of the 2 brothers, warriors who had together written the most glorious chapter of groove metal, now reunited in the same earth, as if they had never been apart. There was no grand ceremony, no public funeral, but the global metal community fell silent in mourning. Artists from Metallica, Anthrax, Slipknot, Lamb of God, and more shared tributes. Thousands of fans brought candles, Pantera shirts, drumsticks, and blacktooth grin tattoos to the cemetery to say their goodbyes. In a rock and roll world where legends often come and go amid scandal and noise, Vinnie Paul chose a different path, quiet, steadfast, and fiercely loyal, to music, to his late brother, and to the values he never betrayed. His final years were not a closing chapter, but a last affirmation that no matter what fell apart, he would keep drumming until his heart could no longer follow the beat. Legacy and impact. Vinnie Paul was not the fastest drummer, nor the most complex, and he never sought to show off his technique just to prove a point. But with every strike, whether the machine gun blast of becoming or the slow crushing pound of walk, he created his own language, a language of weight, precision, and the rawest instincts of heavy metal. Together with Dimebag Darrell, Vinnie didn't just give Pantera its soul. He helped give birth to an entirely new genre, groove metal. At a time when thrash was fading, grunge dominated the airwaves, and many metal bands were compromising just to survive, Pantera, driven by Vinnie's hammering drums, stood tall, refused to bend, and pulled metal back to its primal brutality. Vinnie's influence wasn't just in the music he played, but in the way he lived and kept the fire burning for the metal community. He was the kind of artist who never acted like a star, always ready to hug a fan, raise a drink with anyone after a show, and share backstage stories like an old friend. That authenticity made him a legend who didn't need to be idolized, just remembered. Many drummers of the next generation openly acknowledged his impact. Chris Adler, Lamb of God, Joey Jordison, Slipknot, Jason Bittner, Shadows Fall, all named Vinnie as a role model, not just for his playing, but for his mastery of space, his ability to maintain groove in a genre that can easily descend into chaos. Vinnie wasn't just a drummer, he was the emotional conductor of the entire song, the lifeline that kept the band from falling apart. His legacy was also clear in how he stayed true to himself and his philosophy until the very end. He never chased trends, never forced himself to change to please the market, never cashed in on a Pantera reunion. Vinnie understood the real value of being an artist, and he never sold it short. That's why, even though Hell Yeah never reached the heights of Pantera, the community respected him deeply, because he never stopped fighting. Today, the name Vinnie Paul isn't just listed among the greatest metal drummers, it's etched into a golden era. A time when heavy metal didn't need gimmicks, stages didn't need laser lights, and artists didn't need scandals to be seen. He was the primal beat, the foundation, the pulse beneath the skin of every true metal believer. At the cemetery in Arlington, Texas, beside Dimebag Darrell's grave, there is a headstone engraved with the words, "Don't ever think it's not worth it. Fight until you can't." That line isn't just a life philosophy, it's the entire life of Vinnie Paul, the man who kept time for an entire generation, not with words, but with drum beats born from a heart full of blood, full of fire, and that never once knew surrender. Vinnie Paul didn't fade away like a dying star. He went out like one final drumbeat echoing through the darkness, loud enough to awaken, deep enough to haunt, and real enough to never be forgotten. He didn't need radio hits, million-dollar studios, or spotlights shining on his name. All he ever needed was his drum kit, a brother with a guitar by his side, and a crowd of screaming fans. And that was enough for a life worth living. From piecing together riffs in his father's garage, to topping the Billboard charts with Pantera, and finally shattering into blood and tears in Columbus, Vinnie Paul walked a path no one else could ever replicate. He was the embodiment of loyalty, to music, to Dimebag, and to his own true self, even if it cost him his youth, his family, and ultimately his life. What do you think of the life of Vinnie Paul? A journey filled with pain, fire, and unbreakable spirit. To you, what is the greatest legacy he left behind? Was it the relentless drum beats, the brotherhood that defied death, or the live, loud spirit that never once broke? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe to keep joining us on the journey through the immortal legends of rock and metal.